These were the podcast moments that really blew everyone's minds a bit. I don't think anyone was expecting these types of reveals. Oh my god. Hello and welcome, Jimmy here. We just spent something like 5 or 6 hours going through the podcast again after having watched it. And I'm happy to say we have a pretty exciting video put together here. I'm actually really excited. I will say right away, my overall take on the podcast is that it was incredible. I think Tell did a great job. And perhaps most importantly, I think the content that was revealed during this podcast is pretty game-changing. So to be clear, what I want to do with this video is try and take the whole like 2+ hours of the podcast and get it down into a digestible format. The podcast had about 6 parts. A lot of it was weighted towards like questions about Sam, and then it kind of got into this more developed, will this feature exist, or when is this going to happen? They did a couple of interviews, and then they kind of got more towards like some meatier questions around like the progression of skills and like the lore of the game and where things are going with combat. And then they kind of finished out with like some talk about the meta, some like big penultimate questions that were kind of saved for the end. And then they closed the podcast out with some Q&A. There's many parts here that I wanted to get into. So the way that this video will work, we will start with section 1, which will be the least important items, which I'm calling the smaller items. We'll have timestamps in the video to show these are like the less cool things. These are like the pretty impactful things. And then like, I hope everyone goes to at least the end of the video. If you just want to see the short version, maybe skip to that 3rd timestamp. But the 3rd section will have like the major updates, major reveals, things that I think we cannot really ignore that you want to make sure that you're tuned in with, especially if you're keeping up with Brighter Shores. So without further ado, I think we can jump in here. So again, this first section might be a bit low level and it may not interest you, so feel free to skip ahead. Number 1 on the list was that Ben Samuel, his favorite episode so far is episode 5. Now, given that we have 4 episodes and a lot of people prefer 4, episode 1, I think 2 and 3 are a little bit lower. It's good to know that the future episodes are going to be rewarding. Second point, his biggest surprise overall from the community, he said, was how little toxicity carried over from RuneScape. I thought this comment was unique, but it really does kind of embody the player base that Brighter Shores has. I think that compared to many games that are out there, the people who have kind of retained in this game kind of speaks volumes about what type of player would choose to stick around. And even like from the streams that I've done and like the communities that I hang out with, you know, whether it's on Twitch or even just chatting with people in game, I think most people are pretty willing to help each other, and it is a pretty cool community that I am happy to be in. The number 3 point here, higher level quests will come similar to how storage rifts work to incentivize Carpenter. Now, one of the major problems in the game is that a lot of skills don't feel like they're worth training because, as we talked about in our previous video, there aren't many things to work for outside of leaderboards, outside of leveling up, right? And the only problem with that is that if you want to, you know, push the people to get more than just a cape, there's not many things that they can use to incentivize. So I think it's a good thing to hear that once we get higher level quests, like imagine something as strong and compelling as storage rifts, which were arguably game changing for most skills in the game. That is kind of an encouraging idea, right? So the 4th point is about the repeatability of ventures. Someone had suggested that they let us do a shorter duration for our ventures so that we could turn them in. So if you guys don't know what that means, I'm currently doing lobster ventures, which are 12 hours each. But there are ventures like oysters and others in professions like mining, detective, and merchant that have longer durations like 24 as well. Now, when we have a 24-hour venture, that means that if we check it once a day, the best we can do is like 24 hours and like 1 minute, right? So what happens is that everybody eventually will have their venture time pushed out. So the suggestion was to bring it back. I think this is super cool. He said it's on their to-do list, and I'll talk about more what this to-do list means because he talks on it a few different times in the podcast, and it actually is very important. So we'll come back to that. Number 5, they said they plan to make adjustments to skill income. Leatherworking is not supposed to provide so much gold. So I thought this one was actually really surprising because, you know, right now, I think people assume that there's like this natural inflation with professions, but maybe that's not supposed to be the case. Now, he also mentioned that if there's people abusing stuff, that of course they're going to take, you know, penalizing actions against those players. But right now, it doesn't seem like anybody's really been abusing anything. They've just been doing the profession, right? So curious to see if they end up bringing up things like fishing and chef to get more close to that maybe 3 gold an hour, or if they pull leatherworking back a little bit. Maybe it's because it's paired with merchant. I'm not sure what the gameplay is there, but I would say that it's fair to assume that things may change. So be ready for it. Number 6, this was just an overarching idea that was present in the podcast. His exact words were, we've had a lot of quality of life updates, but now it's time for the content people are wanting. And what that really translates to is that the last 2 months, right? As of filming this, I'm 2 months into the game right now, and I've seen so many QL updates. We know that Andrew actually pulled people on Twitter, or X, formerly Twitter, to confirm that this was kind of the way the player base wanted the game to unravel. So perhaps we may have already had trading if it wasn't for all of the QOLs. So just to take that as a consideration, but then Samuel basically confirmed that for the most part, we should expect more content, which is very, very exciting. They mentioned that there's no plan to allow us to change classes, but that might happen in the future. And then number 8, they have perhaps one of the more important small items here, that they have no plan to ever shut the game down because they have enough content to last years and years and years. Samuel's words were, we have no plans to shut it down, even if the player count is 1. So I know a lot of people, especially in the RuneScape world, have talked about how, what if like the company sees it as a failure? We're kind of putting that idea to rest. It seems that irrespective of how the players react to what's being built, there is a lot of upward potential here. So that should conclude our first section with the small items. Everything here on out is gonna kind of carry more gravitas, so excited to see how people react to this. I'm gonna need you guys' feedback in the comments, so feel free to react accordingly. So number 1 on moderate updates, we got a first little reveal here. He said, while they aren't planning on adding more storage rifts, that was kind of the nature of the question, Samuel hinted that the builder profession is already designed to help us. His exact words were something more along the lines of like, it may or may not, but he made it very clear that builder is going to have impact perhaps in different parts of the game. So curious what that means. It could be something along the idea of like, you know, creating your own like deposit box or something like that. It's unclear. Maybe it's like a one-time thing that has a lot of resource requirement, but exciting to see what that might unravel to. Our second point is about special attacks. He specifically said that they were still planned for 2025, which is a long time, but it sounds like after the combat rework, they do want to get those special attacks in. So in case that kind of slipped through the cracks, that definitely needs to be mentioned here. And there also is a little bit of discussion around like status effects and what things we might be expecting in future episodes. And Samuel's reaction was one of like very overwhelming positivity. Like he got very excited and he got a giddy look on his face. And I figure that means that something good is coming down the line. So I want to make sure I included that on our moderate list here. And the third point is about how they develop in Fen Research Studio. So the terms that were used, we used 2 different terms, but I'm pretty sure they made the same thing. The reference here is a planned roadmap. He also called it an actively being developed list. But one confirmation that we do know is that this does not, for the time being, include raids, bosses, dungeons, or minigames. So while there's a ton of really cool things that they want to do, he went very far in depth about like the way that like a skilling based boss could work. But that being said, it doesn't seem like any of that is going to be coming anytime soon. So this one's more about setting your expectations, maybe not the news everyone wants to hear, but it's kind of good to know what we should be seeing in the short term. The fourth point on the list is about the chat filter, which seemingly makes it into all of my videos lately. TLDR, there is a plan to build a mega thread. I've actually put the mega thread in the description of this video. You should make sure you drop some comments in that thread, or, you know, over here if you're like tired of Reddit. But I'm curious what ridiculous expressions you guys have seen chat filtered. It's pretty egregious at times, so let's see if the Reddit mega thread kind of makes it into the game. There's a lot of really absurd, small, tiny references that just seem over the top, and it's good to hear that they're at least acknowledging that it's a problem, that he's saying that he's going to take that mega thread and they're going to do something actionable and implement it in the game immediately. So very good to hear that. The fourth point, and actually our last point in our moderate section here, is about their anti-gambling stance. There's been a lot of talk around the staking system in the game, around PvP and opt-in. It seems like they are really going to try and prevent some of the pathways that got taken probably towards like, you know, 2008 or so, when players got like, once balanced trade got taken out of the game, I think people got like very desperate for gambling and stuff. The world kind of evolved. There was like, you know, the whole 2008 bubble. And by and large, once the game got back to like the free market around the, what, 2010 maybe, things like the frosty flower and dicing and all these crazy gambling methods, like anything where there was RNG in the game, players were using it to literally run like empires and through like those friend chats and everything. It just got out of hand. So I think this is a good thing. I hope that like staking, like skill-based games and maybe some element of risk reward is still very present. But I, of course, would want the game to adhere to all like the legal laws and stuff like that, so that there is not any illicit activity occurring with the financial transactions. So now is the fun part of the video. We've had some crazy updates already in this video, I think, that we've covered. But number 3, I have 7 points here that are pretty shocking. Some of these are more important than others, and I think this list kind of grows and grows. We'll start off here with the first point, which is about mobile. Now, a lot of people understand that the player base of this game is fairly small. At this point in January 2025, it's come down from about 20,000 actives at release down to about 1,500 actives. And I think one of the major stepping stones to this game to kind of get more traction is to release a mobile application. Much of the game's functionality is built around this idea of complete passive gameplay, while there's a continuing growing chunk of content built around semi-AFK. If both of these things are done correctly, I could see the mobile being very important for both retention and new user acquisition. So I'm very excited to see what can happen with mobile. Number 2, the worm grabbing profession in episode 5, which is Stonemaw Hill, has been confirmed to be called Delver. Now, there is some further talk about the different foraging skills, which we will get into in just a moment. But by and large, very exciting to see that we are getting a name for it. You guys can go into Delver, like it talks about excavation, and like there's different parts with what that actually might mean in terms of what is the gameplay, like what are the loops that we're going to be doing. I guess we'll find out. I'm not going to try and speculate too deep on that. You guys can use Google. Number 3, this one's a bit of a personal favorite, but this was a very offhand comment, but it seemed like he had reason and a bit of vindication behind what he was saying. That when Tell had suggested that it would be more likely, whether it was like a grand exchange or player shops, then Samuel said, without being prompted, it will more than likely be an auction house than player-owned shop. Now, we know auction houses from games like World of Warcraft, but I think this one probably caught me by surprise because it seemed like he was saying it wasn't going to be a grand exchange, but the idea of an auction house is really cool. One, because auction houses can deal with volume really well, but also when I think of auction houses, I think of rare and valuable items. And of course, you guys know, like, one of my biggest complaints in the video we just put out was about itemization. So if they can do this properly with building items that are tradable on an auction house, that would just be fantastic for the health of the game's economy. So the 4th point here, this is a very important one, so I've moved it into our high tier here. They said that prices, meaning shop prices, are likely to be adjusted when player trading is in, so that they don't undercut players too much. This is a very decisive statement because we have kind of been on a bit of a tug of war. The community's kind of said, oh, they're not going to change the game. They're going to keep this balance, this stuff, and the other, all in some certain configuration. But what this is saying is that for any given resource, I think things like potentially Spiral Rack and maybe even stuff like Blood Nettle, like we don't know exactly all of the different materials and what their market rates will be. But if there is indeed like a very significant like imbalance between maybe paired resources, they may have some way that they want to calculate and implement this. But this made it very interesting to me because one of the things I've been very intrigued with this game is the economy and its potential for player trade. I have friends that literally wanted to play this game just to like run the economy and see what markets they could corner. So when I hear this, I think, man, if someone like Sanhai with their 1 platinum goes and buys a bunch of vendor rack, could that be like an incredible investment if the price of that material goes up before? I'm not trying to tell anybody to do anything like this, but I'd say if you feel enough conviction, go ahead and try it out. Like invest 10 gold in some random thing. Could be really interesting. And if you guys have something that you're considering investing in, feel free to let me know. I mean, put it in the comments or just ping me on Discord. But it sounds like it could be a cool opportunity. And I think those conversations will be really fun. I'm sure we'll talk about it on stream. Now, the next point here is about Iron Man. We just got the confirmation that Iron Man will be launched alongside player trading. And it's going to be a one-way opt-in. So as soon as you opt into trading, you can never opt back out as an Iron Man. So Iron Man will always have that option to go full, but otherwise, yeah, that decision's like a which is interesting too, because that means if you're competing overall, there was an Iron Man who was in theory ahead of you. That means that Iron Man could at any time opt back in and then they could pass you or something. But pretty cool. I think this is a good thing. I'm excited to see the game kind of flourish once people kind of diverge on like the Iron Man path, and then like the trade heavy path where some things just drastically change because they're able to make these beneficial relationships. Number 6 is the first of two, what I would call these are like your showstoppers. These were the podcast moments that really kind of blew everyone's minds a bit. I don't think anyone was expecting these types of reveals. So without further ado, let's just hit it. So there was a question about, do you see the game as a story-driven game? And have you planned out a lot of lore in advance? This was like a lore-based question. So no one was really listening to it until we saw Sima be like, ooh, should I leak this thing? And he came out and straight up said, we have planned out 21 episodes so far. The best part of this is not just the 21, but the so far part. We have gotten confirmed names for up to 6 episodes. There are the 4 in-game: Hopeport, Hope Force, Mines of Mantipin, Chronopolis. Episode 5 was confirmed a long time ago as Stone Maw Hill. And then the second episode that technically got confirmed is Bleakholm Crags, episode 6. There's some concept art we're showing on screen here. These were, I'm not sure if these are like data leaks or what exactly, but I'm pretty sure the same information source also has some unconfirmed names. If you guys are curious, episode 7 is supposed to be called Twisting Archipelago, and episode 8 is Castle Cragwatch, which sounds like it could be like a cool PvE dungeon type environment. Cragwatch kind of has like that vampire vibe, but you never know, right? Makes me think of Gen Fnod. But anyway, moving on. Perhaps one of the more encouraging things, if you think about what this means for anybody on a leaderboard, this becomes a very serious endeavor for your total level gamers, because having the idea of potentially, you know, dozens of professions, not just the 18 we have now, and maybe that becomes 22 after 5, maybe it becomes 27 after 6, or maybe it's only 25 or 26. We don't know exactly those numbers, but I think it's fair to say that the game will continue to grow, and hopefully we'll see some episodes that might have less professions introduced, but more reusability of certain professions from older episodes. Now, for episode 6, I think we have some ideas based on the artwork. There's some like things with farming. People have all of these different, you know, theories. There's been some information that we've seen on Reddit. There was a very good thread about various dialogue within the game. Things like an island reference. There's like a desert, I want to say like a palace. Some pretty cool mentions. Definitely will link that Reddit thread as well. But yeah, that leaves us with our final point, guys, which was, has there been any discussion on reworking the grab skills in multiple episodes? Meaning like the hand icon skill, similar to how combat is being reworked. And this it basically put Samuel in a very interesting position. He seemed kind of cornered. And he decided to let it leak here that we're gonna merge the combat professions first, was the official statement. And he shows this image of the ability to respec at an obelisk. And he mentions that there's something else in this screenshot, and we're 99% sure what he's referencing is the fact that you cannot tune gear anymore. So this makes us wonder, what does it mean for tuning and untuning? We've heard a lot of theories on this. You guys should spend a ton of time in Discord and Reddit if you haven't already. But people think that there's potentially some way to either have some sort of affinity with a certain profession that's already been done. There's the possibility of them averaging all the XP from all of the 4 existing professions and just making them into a combat profession that maybe scales higher, like in this current example, maybe 2,000, that gets increased to 2,500 when another profession's added. It could be some sort of, you know, take the highest, or I mean, nobody really knows. A lot of it's just speculation, but I think we're most excited about this. I kind of laugh because people seem to be forgetting that this also alludes to the fact that the 3 gather professions, meaning Forage, Gather, and now Delver, are potentially also going to be merged. I will also add a comment though. He did say it's more likely that we just make the professions more varied, but it seemed like Samuel had some inkling, some reason to believe that this merge was very likely. So I must say I'm very interested. I've put all of my time so far into like getting as many leaderboards as possible. I was trying to make it to like 4 or 5 by the end of the Hopeport race, and then the more I go into this, I'm like, okay, we're only gonna make like probably 3 or 4, 3 if like everything goes to plan. But anyway, the way this game's playing out, I think this is a very long-term game, and it's gonna be exciting to see how people choose to spend their time. And as always, guys, I am excited to do whatever. Even if I get second place, I'm completely content. I've been having a blast just kind of watching all the different things people are doing. And everyone who's helping each other, I think they deserve that extra shout out. So yeah, a long video. We're going to go ahead and close it here. I think many thanks are in order. First of all, to Mr. Telleril of Tells Tales, the Tales of the Shores podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast on Tell's channel and like each episode of the podcast, particularly episode 3, the one that we're basing this video off of. Shout out to Fen Samuel for doing the podcast. I think that was super awesome to see him participate. And of course, Fen Research for approving the list of questions and letting Samuel attend such a dangerous event. So I think this was a very fun video to cover. Let me know if you guys have any other major items from the podcast that I missed, or if you have any comments in general about things that we discussed on this episode. I will hopefully see you guys soon. We're getting back into a regular stream after the holidays. I am excited to keep progressing in the game, and I hope to see you around. Thanks for your time and have an excellent day.